Hey, how you doing? Hey, today I want to kind of go across these three saws here and tell you the difference between the three of them. There's some folks out there who might be looking to do some work to their home lights, and I thought, just in case there's somebody out there who's looking to purchase one before they do some work to it, maybe I could do a little video kind of giving you an idea of the difference between these three saws. They are all three ported. So I want to give you kind of an idea which ones you might want to lean towards if you want to do some port work to an old home light. Alrighty? So here you go, three home light saws. Each one is ported differently, and let me give you kind of a rundown of the differences between the three saws. That way you can decide, if you happen to be looking for an old home light, which one you might prefer. Okay, up first here is the Homelite Super XL 925. It's a very common saw, and this particular one is 82 cc's. They did come in a 77 cc version as well. All those different styles of saws like this, there's many of them. Different years had different, slight changes to them. So as time went on, they kind of progressed and changed the number, if you know what I mean. So these 925s are actually a good choice for an old home light. They are a larger displacement, but I can tell you the weight of them is a little bit on the heavy side. So you got to be prepared for the extra weight. Now they are not a fast turning saw from the factory, but they are not, a real high speed saw. But they do have plenty of torque for days. They're set up that they can handle a 36-inch bar without much issue at all. Now this is the Homelite Super XL Auto. This is basically like a later version of the XL12. The XL12 started out as a manual oiling only saw, and through the years they kind of developed a little bit and changed, and over time they turned into the Homelite Super XL Auto. They are a 58 cc saw, so they don't have the torque of the 82 cc, of course, but they are nice power saw. This is probably one of the most common power saws in the world ever. They have been copied relentlessly over time by many different manufacturers, and so you'll find a lot of parts from other brands may actually fit these saws and vice versa. Now they are not a sleek looking saw. They are, a little more old school styling. They are not a fast turning saw though. They weren't built for high speed cuts. They were built to be a good, reliable firewood saw that would last for a very long time. Now over here is my Super XL 130. These are a little bit more modern than the Super XL Auto. Basically, if you would have taken a Super XL Auto and modernized it at that time period, this is what you would get. Now, if you look closely, the 130 is actually just a hair bigger than the XL Auto. Now, a lot of people comment about how small and compact this saw is, but in reality, it's actually just a tad bigger than the XL Auto. But I think one of the reasons they get that reputation of being a small, sleek saw is because of the way they're designed. See, they have, from the factory, they have more of a sleek look like that, but in a smaller package. These are probably my favorite Homelite saw. There are other versions. There's an XL76 and so forth, but the Super XL 130 is personally my favorite. Now there are design differences till you get to this point. The oil system's different, there's a lot of differences. But if you would tear one of these saws apart, you would find that the same piston is in this saw that's in this saw. But you would also find that this saw will easily outperform this one. Now you might wonder why. Well, one of the main reasons is because of the way the engines are designed. So if you think of the port work, the XL 130 is much has much better numbers, mainly in the squish. The squish is where you're going to notice it the most. These saws are common to have around 30 thousandths of squish, or even better, from the factory, where these saws typically exceed 50 thousandths, and I've seen them over 100 thousandths of squish. There is a very wide margin in which the squish numbers will come in on these saws, especially if you start considering the XL12s and the Super XL12 and all the different versions. The squish numbers will vary quite a lot. Now the Super XL 925, these typically run at around 30 thousandths of squish from the factory as well. Sometimes better, you know, but it's not uncommon to see a number in the 30 thousandths range. So you might wonder, why is it they don't pull a lot of RPM from the factory with the numbers that they have? So there's more to factor in than just the squish when determining just how good the saw performs. So if these Super XL autos, you cannot raise the roof a whole lot because of the squish number. If you do, you end up losing a lot of torque. And the thing you want to consider is just how valuable torque is in a saw. You see, without torque, the chain just won't be able to pull through the wood. So the first thing I typically go for is, you know, finding the amount of torque that I want in the saw to do the job that I want it to do. Now that's where the XL130 comes into play. So for me personally, I prefer to start with a better saw from the beginning. You see, these saws are limited on how much squish you can adjust, otherwise you'll freeport. Where these ones, you can get a pretty decent number with just the base gasket delete. And whenever you're at that point, you know, it's actually not that bad to port these. I find these XL130s to actually be easier to work on than the XL Auto. Even though both of these saws, actually all three of them, are designed very similar to each other. Now, as time goes on and I keep working on the different Homelites, you know, I kind of gravitate towards different ones. And the 925 is one of my favorites just because of the type of saw it is. But I'm not done developing the way I want to have it ported. I still got a lot of work to do to get one running exactly the way I want. Like this one here, I ran the roof a little too high, so I'm not quite happy with the way it runs, but it does run well. This one here, I had to keep the roof low on it, so it doesn't pull the kind of RPM that I'd like, but I had to do that in order to keep the torque. So in the end, the saw does run a lot better than factory simply because of the torque that I have found in this saw. And I can tell you by porting these, I have learned a lot about torque and finding more power in a large squish situation. You wouldn't believe how much you learn about scavenging and so forth whenever you're in a situation that you have to deal with a large squish number. So everything I learned about porting these, I started applying to these. And whenever I did that, boy, did these really turn into a whole new animal. Now, if you ever have the opportunity to tear all three types of saws apart, you will see what I'm talking about. They are very similar in design. They are all reed engines, so they do have reeds instead of, you know, the piston port setup. And you can see this one has had some more wild modifications at the carburetor. Now, my favorites, I do have favorites, but for different reasons. If I'm going to go out and I just want to have a nice relaxing day of cutting firewood, this is the guy I'm going for. If I'm not worried about how fast it runs, but just a nice comfortable saw to run all day long, this is going to be one of them that I want to go to. There's something about the way this saw is built that the balance of it is extremely comfortable to run. Now the 925, it's basically like running one of these, just bigger. It is very well balanced. You know, they are a bit on the heavy side though. So if you don't like a heavy saw, these might not be for you. But for bigger pieces of wood, this is where it's at. Again, they're not a high-speed saw, but they are very comfortable to run, especially when you're in a situation where you have a lot of big wood. Now these Super XL 130s, these are my favorite to hot rod. These are such a fun saw to modify to get the performance, you know, to get the full performance levels that they are capable of. But you do run into issues with these. See, the bearings can be difficult. Finding replacement cylinders are really difficult. Sometimes you have to buy another saw just to find another cylinder. So if you want to modify these, you know, be prepared for running into issues with parts. You see, these Super XL autos, you can still buy bearings, you can still buy cylinders, you can still buy pistons and all that stuff. But with these 130s, you're very limited. You have to be a little bit more careful with these saws. So here's a little information for you. Say you're out and you're looking to buy a 925 or a similar saw. I will be honest, I have bought more than 20 of these, and I can tell you, I'd say 50% are coming in with bad cylinders. Even though they still run, they have a bad cylinder. Most people who are selling these don't know enough about what to look for, and you could end up in a situation where you're overpaying for a saw that has a bad cylinder. In fact, these saws are so popular that a lot of times they draw more money than what they're actually worth. Now, a lot of these will still run, but they do have cylinder issues. And if you want a nice pristine saw, be careful. I used to be willing to pay $200, $300, even $400 for some of them. I've seen them go for more, but anymore, I spend as little as possible. I try to stay in the 50 to 75 range just because of the large volume of them that I'm finding that have bad cylinders. It is an extremely common issue with this saw. Now, a lot of the times they would still run, but they are technically a burned up saw, and replacing that cylinder can be quite challenging. These XL autos, they're another one that's very common to be messed up from the start. But these ones, you can easily replace the piston and cylinder. So it's a lot easier, but still try not to overpay for them because of how common it is for them to be a heavily scored cylinder. These saws were just run forever. Even though they had scoring, they would still run, and people typically ran them until they just would not run anymore. Now these Super XL 130s, it's still another issue with these Homelites. A lot of them just got ran into the ground. So anymore, I'm very careful with how much I spend on these saws. I try to get them as cheap as possible just because of how many I'm finding that are burned up. So be careful when you're out looking for these saws. There's a little information for you. I hope it helps you if you're out shopping for one of these saws. Always keep in mind that these old saws are almost always going to have an issue of some sort. Almost all of them have air leaks. A lot of them are burned up. A lot of them have low compression issues. And some of them are hard to get parts for. So try to be mindful of that whenever you're shopping for a saw. Alrighty, well, thanks for coming around, and later.